before the accident up there?
Yeah.
Someone got hurt.
They did?
A lady. She broke her neck.
Oh my god, but you can see her?
Yes.
Where is she?
Standing next to my window.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Lobby, a podcast that lives here on the Real Lovers podcast feed. And with summer winding down, Trap Summer is just starting for us, or Hot Shyamalan Summer, as we would like to call it here on the podcast. After seeing Trap and reviewing that review's already out right now, I really got into like this mindset. I want to revisit all of M. Night Shyamalan's films just because I've seen them all before, and I feel like we've reached a point of his filmography where we have to kind of revisit his films, is because it's a very like diverse like filmography. And joining me for this first episode, where we're talking about The Sixth Sense, released in 1999 and starring Bruce Willis, is Martin, or Van Watches Movies. How you doing, Martin?
I'm doing good. I'm doing very good. How are you, Marley?
I'm doing great. It's been a while since you've been on the Real Lovers podcast. Last time you were on, we were talking about Solaris, uh, a film that I didn't necessarily love, but I respect. I definitely need to rewatch like in a theater. I think that's what I mentioned like during our review. But I'm glad that you're back to talk about some M. Night Shyamalan.
Having a movie that you don't really love but you completely respect, I feel like that's how I feel about most of M. Night's movies, if I'm being honest. So
Mhm.
that was a very fitting sentiment.
Yeah, I it's I think M. Night is definitely, especially after watching Trap. I've seen Trap about two times right now, and he's definitely a filmmaker like working today that is, you don't really see the type of films that he makes, and I'm really glad that he is still making films. And I don't know, I'm very excited for this retrospective. So
Yeah, he's been working for a long time, and I mean, Sixth Sense is probably his biggest film, even to this day. Like people still kind of reference it as like peak Shyamalan. My personal
mhm.
favorite, I'd say, is Unbreakable, maybe even Signs. But like, yeah, I think when people think of Shyamalan, this is probably the biggest name that comes up, but also just like his probably most defining work. Even movies today like Trap, I'd say, kind of fit into this like box of like it could have easily been another movie where like there's a reveal at the end, but you know.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But before we get into like our talk on the Sixth Sense, I would just like to acknowledge two other movies. Is the Wide Awake and Praying with Anger. Like these are, Praying with Anger was like basically a movie he made with all South Asians, and basically made it for like no money at all, and you played it at film festivals. And when you hear him talk about like that film, it doesn't seem like he's completely proud of it. It's just kind of like something like, it's always like you're a filmmaker, Martin. So you, like your first film is something that you're proud of, but you kind of like, I have other films. Please watch those. Those are much better. Not saying that that's the case for you, but does that make sense? Or
I think it does. I think right now I've only gotten one short film out for me so far, and we're still working on getting the second one out. And for the most part, I mean, it feels that way because there's so little resources, in the sense that it's kind of the same thing that he did. I'm using it with practically no budget. Um, but with his end, he made a whole feature film. Mine are short films because I can't afford to do a whole feature film, and feeling like the resources I want to be there for.
Mhm.
But that being said, did you watch Praying with Anger or Wide Awake?
I have not seen those yet. Maybe if the listeners demand it, like we could do like a bonus episode for for those movies. But I am very intrigued because I think Praying with Anger is actually, you can stream it for free on the Archive
It's
Network.
It's completely like you can find it on YouTube, you can find it on Internet Archive as well. But
Hmm.
it is one of those movies that I am still kind of impressed by, mainly because for this to be his first film, the writing is like a little bit lacking for the most part, and it does kind of have a lot of structural issues. But when it comes to like the actual filming part of it and the editing aspect of it, behind the scenes, behind the camera, there's a lot of talent there. And I think that's one of those things I really noticed even watching that movie. And you can only watch it in 480p. Like, it
Mhm.
is not a very good resolution. It is hard to watch that movie and really kind of follow exactly what's going on. But having watched Wide Awake and Praying with Anger, I would say I would rather watch Praying with Anger again over Wide Awake. And that says something
Mhm.
just considering that sort of resolution that you have there.
Yeah. And Wide Awake is kind of like his first studio film that he made,
Mhm.
like that was like funded by like the studio, like funded by the studio, correct, right?
He did. He worked with Harvey Weinstein, unfortunately. And
Oh,
funny enough, I think it was shot in 94, 95, like 1994, around that era. And
mhm.
because Harvey Weinstein kept demanding for him to cut the film shorter and shorter and basically just butcher it, it almost just never got released. And so it was released in, I think, 1998. And
Mhm.
it was released in like less than 500 theaters, I want to say.
Mhm. So not a lot of people are able to see it, but I just wanted to like shout out like those two movies just because I know a lot of people are like The Sixth Sense was like his first big movie, even though he released two movies like before that. But yeah, if people demand it, let us know in the comments down below if we should cover them. Otherwise, we're just gonna keep going forward. So without further ado, Van, the Sixth Sense came out in 1999, probably one of the bigger move like years for movies ever. You got The Matrix, you got The Blair Witch Project, which released on the same day of The Sixth Sense. Then you had Star Wars Episode One releasing in that year as well. When The Sixth Sense came out, like what was kind of like your life going on? Like, did you see this movie in theaters, or did you rent this movie like at a Blockbuster or something like that?
When The Sixth Sense came out, I was probably lying in a crib somewhere because I was 1 years old.
Okay.
That being said, I have watched it since then, and I
Hmm.
feel like it's one of those things where no matter how many times you've tried to like escape that sort of like feeling of like, oh, well, I know this movie how it ends, I know the whole line behind everything, and it's easy to kind of go into a movie knowing that sort of twist ending with Bruce Willis. I mean, there's even a joke about it in 50 First Dates that I actually watched before The Sixth Sense, but I think I may have talked about it last time with you on the podcast as well, but how I grew up across the street from a library,
Hmm.
and they pretty much had every movie you could think of. And so that's kind of how I got through a lot of movies. And from that sense, I started learning about directors and like their filmography. And that's how I watched The Sixth Sense, actually, was by looking at it like his row of movies and seeing like, oh, he's got multiple films in
Hmm.
this like lineup. And that's how I watched it for the first time. Even then, I think I was about 13 or 14 years old, and I still was very surprised by how good it was. The ending really surprised me as well. It still held up really well.
Hmm.
But that's my experience with the film. I've since then gone back and watched it many times and still feels like it holds up really well, even knowing the ending as well.
Yeah, I was 9 years old when this movie came out. I didn't watch this movie in theaters, but it was like a pretty common tradition for my brother and I to watch to go to the Blockbuster and just like pick out a movie and we'll just watch it like for the weekend. And my brother was a huge Bruce Willis fan, and I wasn't too familiar with him, but my brother picked it out. Let's watch this movie. I like Bruce Willis, and then like I was completely blown away at that point. I just have very fond memories of sitting on the couch with my brother and just watching Halo Joel Osment just like act his heart out in this movie. And
Mhm.
at 9 years old, obviously I don't know like the complete nuances of like acting or like what was going on, but I even know like when I was nine, like I knew I was watching something special with The Sixth Sense. And I don't know, I just love that feeling, like when you're still new to movies and you start and you start realizing, well, like, wow, we maybe we are watching the next Spielberg. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that picture of him on is I think it's Entertainment Weekly that says the next Spielberg is
Hmm.
just one of those things that like it's been just memed to death. But at the
Hmm.
time, he really had a lot of potential. I mean, he had 4 movies back to back to back that were just absolutely bangers. So
Hmm.
I think at one point it probably felt like we had the next Spielberg on our hands for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned like he's had bangers since from The Sixth Sense from all the way from Unbreakable to Signs, he almost had like a, or not almost, he pretty much had the same kind of like track record that Jordan Peele is having today. Would you kind of consider Jordan Peele and M. Night Shyamalan kind of like similar filmmakers, or at least like to their filmography?
I think so. It's strange because I think with Jordan Peele, it's such a different experience for all of us because we still had something of a, like, we knew who Jordan Peele was before he started making movies. I
Mhm.
remember whenever he announced that he was doing Get Out, and whenever that film was coming out in theaters, I thought, what is this guy doing with horror? Like, we know him for comedy. And then I saw the movie and I was like, oh, like, this is actually insanely good. Like, how did he pull this off? Whereas Shyamalan he went to film school. He comes from an ethnic background like of India, and that kind of is one of those things that resonates with me as well. But also having him grown up in a Catholic school of sorts, it's interesting because they're both just so different dynamics. But in a way, we're 3 for 3 right now with Jordan Peele. It could be that
Mhm.
this next fourth film is his last great movie, like the way that Signs was, or even The Village was. But at this point, I
Mhm.
think if he keeps going at the pace that he is, it's very possible that we do keep getting great films from Jordan Peele. But I think what happens with Shyamalan is that because he had one great movie with a twist at the end of it, the rest of his movies following, like Unbreakable, Signs, and The Village, they've all become movies that just have small twists at the end of them, and that's kind of become his trademark. Even so much so
Mhm.
that his daughter had a film in theaters pretty recently that felt very much like, oh, well, maybe there was a twist at the end of it just for the sake of saying, like, it's the old Shyamalan twist.
It runs in the family.
It does. It feels
Yeah.
like it's almost like he can't escape it. And that's why I think he's done so many of the movies that he's done since, because he's trying to escape that sense of, I'm not just this one trick pony. I'm not just known for my twists. I have other stories in me. I was
Mhm.
thinking about Trap specifically recently, where I remember whenever the trailers and all the marketing for that movie was dropping, you might have seen it as well on Twitter as well, but uh this sense of people saying, like, I don't think Josh Hartnett's the killer. I think he's there to take on the killer. Like, that's going to be the twist, right? And I was like,
Mhm.
you know what? Maybe that's true. Like, maybe we're not seeing it right. Like, he wouldn't put a spoiler like that in the trailer. But then as the movie went on, I was waiting for a twist, and at the end there is something of like kind of a small twist. But even when you're watching, even when I was watching it, I was like, it would have been so easy for him to hide the fact that Josh Hartnett is the killer and had that
Mhm.
been the twist at the end. But the fact is he told us right from the beginning, Josh Hartnett's the killer. Just have fun.
Yeah, and I do love that he's trying to reinvent himself and trying to get away from like this twist aspect. But the thing that I love the Sixth Sense, especially on this rewatch, is like people like you
Mhm.
said, people. I believe the audience has kind of painted that on him, like he's the twist guy, because like just like you said, like he's like Unbreakable, like it has a twist in there, but not to the extent of like the Sixth Sense. And I feel like the audience is looking for a twist, since like the stuff that happens like in the Sixth Sense is so expertly well done. Everyone's just kind of like, oh, like I said, like you're the twist guy. But the thing that the reason why this twist in the Sixth Sense is done so well, like on a rewatch, is that is I see the seeds that Shyamalan is planting throughout throughout like the first act and like the second act. And like on a rewatch, I hate it because you can tell like this is like when the script is like really well done, because it's making me feel stupid. Because like
Mhm.
I remember just on this recent rewatch, I was like how did I not see that when I was 9 years old, or on multiple rewatches that I've had of this film. Like there's um like the scene where Bruce Willis is having that anniversary dinner
Mhm.
with his wife.
She doesn't talk to him.
I
Yeah.
she doesn't talk to him, and just like that's so totally obvious. But Shyamalan does like he does like a brilliant like move where it's just like it makes you feel like he's there, and it kind of plays tricks with the audience, like in the editing. I don't
Mhm.
know, it's absolutely brilliant. So
Yeah, It's interesting. I think it's one of those things where, and it's one of those aspects of it where it's even kind of gotten out of the film sphere of like, oh well, this movie is just so loved by people and in the film circle online and people who are into
Hmm.
film. But I mean, there's comedy specials that have referenced this as well. Do you
Hmm.
know who Nate Bargatze is?
No.
So
Uh,
he's got this wonderful bit where I can't remember which special it's in, but he's got a wonderful bit that you probably have to look up after this. But he's basically just saying that movie works so well because it made more sense to the audience that the wife wasn't talking to him than the fact
mhm.
that he was dead. And it's just such a funny line because it's true. Like,
Yeah. it's it's that is kind of funny because yeah, because I don't know. I remember seeing like another like video of someone kind of like analyzing like that scene, and like people notice that the chair doesn't move when he sits down,
the
and
chair
they're
doesn't move
like,
when he sits down. There's a lot of things that, like, if you
mhm,
go back and watch it, you can really tell. He's wearing only clothes and things that he touched on the night that he died.
mhm,
Whenever he's talking to Haley Joel Osment's character, I think his name is Cole.
mhm,
He only ever really talks to him whenever the mom is either out of the room or, like, for example, whenever he comes home and they're sitting there talking, like they're sitting down, they're not talking to each other at all.
okay. So like when the scene like that you just mentioned, like when he's coming home, I love the way the shot is set up. This is like another reason why I love Shyamalan, just because as a filmmaker like myself, and I'm sure you love this as well, is that he knows how to just frame everything, and basically, I'm pretty sure he storyboards like every single shot. Like he knows like how everything's gonna look. But what I love most about like that shot is that the way it's just kind of it's set up. It's kind of like Cole's or Halo Joel Osment's character, uh, like two different worlds. Like you have like the spirit world where Bruce Willis is at, and then you
Mhm.
have like a reality where his mom's at. I just love that. I just love the duality there. So
Did you know that she's wearing a wig in that whole movie?
I didn't know what I heard a little fun fact about that because she shaved her head, and M. Night Shyamalan was worried something about how the studio was
She
like
wore a wig whenever she met with the studio because he was scared that they were gonna like say something about her hair, but she shaved her head
mhm,
for I think it was Velvet Goldmine, but she was in that like
mhm,
the year before and her hair hadn't grown back yet. So that's fun. Fun little
yeah.
fact.
Yeah, I just the wig looks great on her, but
I
I don't know.
honestly didn't know that it was a wig until after I saw the movie and I was like doing research for that video and I was like, huh, like this is crazy. I
Right.
like went back and looked up pictures to see if I could notice it. And I was like, oh, I guess I could tell now, but if I didn't know any better, I wouldn't have known.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, but people like we're gonna be spoiling this movie, like if you haven't seen it. So it's
If you haven't seen it, Bruce Willis dies at the end. Or no, Bruce Willis was dead the whole time. I'm sorry.
yeah. uh while he was but I don't know, it's kind of starting off at the beginning of this movie. The thing that the setup of like M. Night Shyamalan knows how to set up a character like super well, where
Mhm.
Malcolm is like this child psychologist, and it's his job to help out children. And the way, like, going back to like the way M. Night Shyamalan sets up shots, I love the way he obviously is a huge fan of Hitchcock, and how Hitchcock uses like shiny surfaces to see what's happening like in the background. I
Mhm.
just love like the shot of his award and him having uh like just, just obviously him and his wife were having like a dinner celebrating like this award. But I just love the way that shot is set up, like in the beginning, just like, hey, the like this Malcolm is uh like he's great at what he does. And then I guess like a twist happens where his a former patient kind of like breaks into his house and basically is suffering
Yeah.
from
Donnie
uh,
Wahlberg, I think is his name. It's Mark
yeah, Donnie
Wahlberg's
Wahlberg.
I can't remember if it's his cousin or it's his brother. But yeah, he
Hmm.
took that role really seriously. He lost like 40 pounds
Hmm.
just for that role, which is crazy. But yeah, he's awesome in that movie. He's only in it for like 4 or 5 minutes, but he steals the show for a while.
Yeah, I just like the way Shyamalan shoots that scene, because obviously it leads into Bruce Willis and his wife were like they're gonna have a night together, and then the way the sound like comes in, something like someone breaks into his room, and then he walks into the bathroom and here's Vincent or Donnie Wahlberg's character just stripped down naked or stripped down to his tidy whities, and it's he's obviously having a moment, and it's like just because he's gifted just like Cole's character or Haley Joel Osment's character. But
yeah, actually, whenever when they were shooting that thing, I can't remember if it was before or after, but Donnie Wahlberg was like really pushing for his character to be naked for that scene, and the studio was like, or I think Shyamalan was like, the studio's never gonna let that happen, dude. So you're just gonna have to wear something like work with us here.
Right. I don't think like this movie. I don't know. Like it would be an R rating for sure if he was.
Oh yeah, 100% it would be. I mean, his first R-rated movie I think is The Happening. I could be wrong, but pretty sure it's The Happening. And then he did Knock at the Cabin, and that one's rated R. But I think those are the only two of his that are R-rated.
Knock at the Cabin's rated R.
I think so.
Nothing happens. That's later in the retrospective. So I'll just pause real quick just to check.
R-rated, violence and language.
Oh wow, it's so tame. That's like the most tame.
That's why it's only violence and language. If it was too extreme, disturbing violence.
But kind of going back to let's go back to The Sixth Sense, and so obviously Vince is having like this moment, and he points a gun like at Malcolm just because like Malcolm never took him seriously, took like his gift seriously, and didn't understand like what was going wrong with him, and so Vincent shoots Malcolm and shoots himself, and that's when we lead into Next Fall, like the title card for Next Fall, and enters the picture of Cole. What do you think of like this opening sequence of Cole being introduced and Bruce Willis kind of stalking him in a way? It's kind of revealed a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think the opening, like actually I'd say like the first 20 or 30 minutes of this movie are really effective. Like if you showed this to somebody and you only showed them the first like 20 minutes, I'm sure that they'd be one of those things where like they'd probably want to watch the rest of the movie. But it's such a different time, you know. I think it's one of those things where like it's a movie, so there's kind of like that movie logic where you have to kind of raise your sense of disbelief or lower your sense of disbelief just to kind of get through a scene like this where you're wondering like, why is he following this kid? But then there's also this sort of like idea in your head that's like, oh, maybe he's the kid's doctor already, maybe he already knows him. You're not really questioning why he's following him, but then you find out, oh, he doesn't know this kid. But him being a doctor and him being somebody who works in child psychology, I don't think it's something you really question a whole lot as an audience member.
Yeah, I didn't question it too much. It's just like, especially on this rewatch, I was just kind of like, this is kind of creepy a little bit if I'm not thinking about it like completely. But knowing he is a doctor, and obviously like the way it's set up with it, like he's an award-winning like child psychologist, like I was able to kind of just like dismiss that like right away. Yeah, and then we are introduced a little bit more to Malcolm's and Anna's kind of like distance and how he's trying to mend. Like they're obviously kind of like going through some tension, and like we talked about it a little bit earlier in the podcast where like how like why we think that's obviously like a huge hint where Bruce Willis' character is dead. But what do you think of how that's all set up?
I think the first time you watch it, and it's hard to kind of gauge it because I mean I was 14 or 15 when I watched it, so I don't really have any specific instance or idea of being able to say like, oh, well, this is what I thought whenever I was watching it. But as an
Mhm.
adult, and since I've watched it multiple times, I go back and watch it. It's one of those things where I'm like, it's so obvious, but also from a filmmaking perspective and all just kind of taking it in as it comes and goes, it's very effective. I think it works really well for me. I think it's one of
Mhm.
those scenes that in just one of those ways that it's constructed that it's like it sells it because you think they're having like some sort of like tension in their relationship. You think that they're having struggles as like a couple. There's even that scene where I think she's like kissing somebody or somebody's coming to visit her and asking if he could stay or something like that. And it's just like framing it as like her being the bad guy, but also like
Mhm.
him showing up late to dinner. So it's like, I'm sure there's probably something on both sides. Even knowing the ending of him being dead, it's kind of strange to think about it because you're watching it. You're like, there's so much obvious stuff here, but it's easy to kind of forget about it as you're watching it.
Yeah. I think it's totally easy to forget about it when you're watching it, but with the knowledge of him being dead, especially on a rewatch, I totally believe like the scenarios he put himself in, just because like that's kind of like the first thing that everyone talks about, like when they die, is like they want to not necessarily not well, just look at like the people in their past relationships and see if like are they getting together with someone else, like the scene where like she's on a date with someone else and
Hmm.
he's obviously jealous and like he breaks like the window, like
Hmm.
that's like I don't know, I thought that was brilliant just because that's what everyone, it's like do people, like when a partner passes away, do they get back, do they get into a new relationship, or they can't they can't start fresh or anything like that. I don't know, I love that. So
Have you seen David Lowry's Ghost Story?
I have not, but I
Okay, that's
it's on
only
my
the only
watch
reason I
list.
ask about that is just because there's a scene pretty similar to that specific instance in that movie where like I mean, the whole premise of that movie is that he's dead. There's not really a reveal at the end of it. It's just kind of you're following this dead character as a ghost. But there's a similar scene where Rooney Mara's character, who played the wife, has like a partner or somebody come home with her, and he's just kind of watching as it happens. And it's very similar to it, but also very different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. That movie's definitely on my watch list. I just haven't gotten around to it, but I just like it when like people who die like come back and just not necessarily haunt their significant other, but just kind of like poke at
Ghost.
them a little bit. Yeah, but I definitely like that moment. But kind of like moving on a little bit past Malcolm and Anna's kind of like relationship. Let's get into like more of Malcolm and Cole's kind of like first therapy session, and Malcolm's slowly starting to realize that this kid is not necessarily special, but kind of like there's something um there's something up with this kid. I don't want to say, I'm kind of like walking a very thin line and saying he thinks something's wrong with this kid, just because uh I don't know. It's I just don't like, because I know that Malcolm didn't think like this kid's evil or anything like that. He just knows that so, something special. Is special the right word? To,
I would say it. Like he could tell that there's something going on with him. Is that what I would just say it is? And there
Mhm,
definitely is. There's a lot of moments, and I think there's one scene specifically where he's kind of like talking about like what it could possibly be, and he's not really
mhm.
trying to rule anything out, but he's like kind of weighing it out, and he's like, "Well, it's not this because of this, but it's also can't be this because he's too timid," kind of thing. So, I know what scene you're talking about, though. It's a pretty good scene.
Yeah. I just I just love kind of like how they're uh like the scene where they're walking like in like the South Philadelphia neighborhood, and and Cole basically is saying that he doesn't want people to know that he's like a freak, and
Hmm.
that word constantly comes up when comes out of Cole's mouth, because he obviously like he sees dead people and he doesn't want to tell people that he like he's special in this way because people might make fun of him or think or other him because he's not like everyone else. But Malcolm basically says like, don't say that. Like you're not a freak just because you're different from someone else. Like that's really none of anyone's business, to be honest. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I just love that so much because it's a totally different film. But when that scene came up, it made me think of Little Miss Sunshine. It's a
Yeah.
completely different film, but the scene where Alan Arkin's character and Olive says, "I don't want to be a loser because Daddy hates losers," and Alan Arkin does like a brilliant scene saying that losers are described as people that don't even try, and you're trying. I think I saw those two scenes, and I saw the relation, like the interaction that those two characters are having were very similar. So yeah.
They do feel similar. It's been a while since I've seen Little Miss Sunshine, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Great scene as well. I feel like I see that like on movie pages all the time, like the quote from it. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You see like the pictures and they always have like the quotes.
Yeah, for sure. But I don't know. Then we're kind of one thing I do love about like Cole's secret is that you don't the audience doesn't necessarily find out like start seeing like ghosts until like the second act. And I think it's like an hour in. It's an hour into the movie where we
I
don't
want to
actually
say that you find out about that like right at the hour mark, is what if I remember correctly.
Yeah, just because what I love, like the way Shyamalan crafts that is that the first hour is basically um, the world around Cole and how they kind of perceive him, is because they I I know a lot of people kind of bring this up on film Twitter, but it's kind of a crutch that M. Night Shyamalan has, where he gives like his main characters kind of like a mental illness, and the way it's perceived within the first hour, it's like it's Cole has like a mental illness, and that's why he's othered, and and that's why he's special in a sort of way. And I feel like it's Shyamalan's in other films that we'll obviously talk about like on this podcast. I feel like it's not as bad. I feel like this film, it's not as bad as like his other films. But what do you think about kind of like Shyamalan's crutch and having most of his characters in films kind of having a mental illness? So
I'm trying to think of what other movies there are that he's done where it's mental illnesses. I know that like Unbreakable, you have Elijah who's got a disability with like his body can't produce like a certain calcium or something like that. And that's why his bones are so fragile. Signs, I'm trying to think of what the mental illness would be there. I know that the kid has asthma, and that's probably, I guess you could consider that an illness, but I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of his movies are really similar. I've rewatched a lot of them recently just because I'm doing this video right now as I'm working on it. But a lot of his movies have very similar themes, very similar ideas and concepts that, like, even though he didn't explore it completely here, he may explore it in the next movie. So it's I think at the end of the day, every writer, every director that there is out there, you're not going to find a single one that doesn't have a lot of the same similar themes, the same sort of like writerisms is what I like to call it. Is just like you have so much of what you know how to write, and it's so easy to keep writing it that way. Aaron Sorkin specifically being one of those people that I'd say as a writer, people kind of bag on him for having a very specific style of writing, but it's what he knows, you know? And so at the end of the day, it's how he writes. It's either like it or you don't, but you can always tell when it's someone's work, and you can always tell whenever they're going from film to film to film, they're evolving, they're learning, they're essentially like evolutionizing how they work. They evolve differently. But I think at the end of the day, there's always like one constant element or theme between a filmmaker's work that typically ties it all together for me.
Yeah. I totally agree. I don't think Shyamalan is doing it in any malicious way, but like you said, it's like you know what you know, and like yeah, there's kind of like elements of that, but I've always believed that like when like filmmakers always tie themselves to like characters or the main characters like in their film. And I think Shyamalan saw a lot of himself in Cole, and then also Bruce Willis's character Malcolm, because like Shyamalan, like growing up, like he was a film lover just like you and me, and this is and like I don't want to say that all film lovers get othered, but we look at films in different ways, and just like Cole, he saw the world differently than everyone else, and I don't know. I saw a lot of that, especially on this rewatch of The Sixth Sense, where I saw that connection between Shyamalan and Cole, especially.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. Kind of let's move on since we talked a little bit about the first hour. What do we think about like when the audience actually starts seeing like ghosts? Like, what do you think about like any of the like how those scenes are shot, especially?
I think in general, like Shyamalan, I wish that he would just do like a full-on horror movie. Just for that specific reason alone, because this movie kind of delves into it, and I'd say like you have other movies of his that kind of feel like they're trying to delve into like real horror territory, but
Mhm.
they're also all just such human stories. Like I think The Visit might be the first movie of his, along with maybe I'm trying to think, like Signs maybe. There's no real movie of his that I'd say is like pure horror.
Mhm.
But seeing that he has the elements and seeing that he has the ability to do it here, it kind of leaves me wanting more. I think he
Mhm.
shoots a lot of it in a really smart way where it's like you don't show too much of it, because if you do, it kind of takes away that magic.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing with like you could say like Aliens, or even the first Alien movie and then Alien Romulus that just released. I
Mhm.
feel like Alien Romulus had the perfect amount of like, let's show the monster in glimpses. Let's show that xenomorph in very small doses because it keeps it interesting. It's the same thing with like this movie in general. The Sixth Sense, Signs is kind of the same way. Um, you don't really see the aliens that much in that movie because first off, they really just couldn't afford to show them that much. But there always seems to be some sort of element of that within the movies themselves, like Jaws. It was that they had the shark, but it just was never functioning. There's always some sense of
Mhm.
like, oh, well, we had limitations. That's why we couldn't show it, but it just sells the movie even more.
Mhm. Yeah, and I also love the just how like when spirits are around. I love that, especially like spirits that are angry. I think it's spirits that are angry where you see like where it starts being cold, like near Cole, and you see
Hmm.
like his breath, and and like that's how you know like the spirits are angry, and not necessarily angry, or they're just frustrated with Cole because they see like become like further on through the movie, like Malcolm's character says like, I know you're scared of like these ghosts or these spirits, but it's a beautiful line when Malcolm tells Cole, maybe you should just talk to them, like
Hmm.
open up to them, and see like, because spirits are here for, I don't know, Martin, if you're like, if you believe in ghosts or anything like that, but I know a few people that are, and pretty much every time you bring up spirits, they always mention like, oh, ghosts are here because they have unfinished business, and that's what really like the Sixth Sense is about. It's about these spirits using this kid to get out a message that they he can only send to reality. But
I'm not sure how real I think ghosts are. I feel like I teeter back and forth with it.
Mhm.
But I do think at the end of the day, it is human nature to kind of fear something that you don't completely understand, but also have fear for something that is also fearful. Like I think
Mhm.
in the same sense, it's kind of like animals. You have a lot of people who are scared of snakes. You have people who are scared of spiders. But at the end of the day, like snakes and spiders are much smaller than us. And
Mhm.
they're a lot more scared of us than we are of them, and it's because we're bigger than them. They know we're bigger than them. So, I mean, I grew up on a farm, so I had
Mhm.
seen snakes all the time growing up, and that was one thing my dad taught me pretty quickly was that the snakes are probably more scared of you than they are of them.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of the big thing that you see with the characters and the ghosts here as well. It's just that they're also fearful. Everybody's kind of fearful of one thing or another in this movie.
Mhm. They're fearful because they died in certain ways and they couldn't get closure the way that they
Hmm.
wanted to get closure, which like I wish the movie kind of dived a little bit deeper into like the stories of well, the movie kind of tells like the first ghost where he sees her in the kitchen and obviously it's like a domestic abuse situation, and which is really terrifying and kind of upsetting like when we think about it now. But the most upsetting like story that Cole actually like helps out like the situation is the little girl that he finds. Like it's an upsetting like sequence where Cole like sees her like pop
Hmm.
into like his little tent that he's protecting himself from like these spirits, and she's just puking like all over his floor.
Yeah.
It's like at least have some respect a little bit. I know that I know that your
He can
mother
do what he
like
wants.
technically
He's got
killed you.
abilities.
Yeah.
It does kind of make me think of an Unbreakable as well, like kind of
Mhm.
being again like a scene that he redoes, but whenever he finds out that like he has this ability to like find out who's kind of like a bad like find out what they've done, essentially like intuition in a sense. Like I think that's what he says in
Mhm.
Glass, but the sequence where he touches that guy and he finds out that he's like kidnapped like 3 women. It's kind of
Mhm.
the same scene if you think about it. Like very much like the same structure. Everything is kind of there the same way. But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. But that scene is terrifying in the Sixth Sense, where well, was it Kyra? Kira?
Kira, I
That
think is her name.
yeah. She gives him she gives Cole like a tape and and basically like tells him not necessarily not she doesn't tell him, but he knows like to take this tape and show people what actually happened. It's such a terrifying like it's kind of a wild like setup where it's like we find
The movie
out
can
that
never be
her
made
mother
today. People don't have VHS players anymore.
well yeah that's something that like if Cole was Gen Z or Gen Alpha, they're like, what is this? How do
I would well, here's my thing with something like that is just thinking about like the idea of like what if they made this literally like 4 years later? And then I would
Mhm,
just think, oh well, they could just adapt it and make it a DVD. And then I think
mhm,
about it, it's like, what if it happened 10, 20 years later? It's like, well, people don't have DVD players anymore. It's insane. But
mhm.
how would they just show that? Like,
Or not. I wasn't thinking about that when Cole like shows like the tape in front of like Kira's like funeral.
mhm.
I'm thinking of like the reaction at the funeral where it's like
Oh, well, yeah.
he
I was just saying in general, like that was something that popped
yeah
into my head. I have this weird thing
yeah
with movies where I will watch it and I think if you had to adapt this for modern day or if you had to adapt this for a different time period, how would you do it? And that
mhm,
was just one of the things that I thought about with that movie because it's I mean, it's 1999, like that was right when VHS like ended.
mhm.
Like 2003 or 2004, I want to say was like the last VHS made. I think it was Cars.
Oh jeez.
Or actually, I think it was 2005 or 2006 when I think about it. But yeah, it was like it wasn't around much longer after that.
Mhm. Yeah, I just I would think there would be more of an uproar during that funeral. Like not a like because the mom did a terrible thing like at that
Yeah,
moment.
they probably would have called the
It's
cops.
call the cops or at least like someone say I'm gonna fight you or something like that just because like that's some revealing evidence of what happened and just some very
There's a lot
sinister
going
as
on in
well.
that scene as a whole. Yeah, I think there would probably be a lot more of an overreaction, but at the same time,
Hmm.
it's a movie, so it's like movie logic.
Yeah, and M Night always kind of like he kind of I don't want to say he downplays a situation, but I feel like that's part of like his writing style too, where like something that could be led as dramatic, he kind of like pulls back and just kind of like
I
lets
feel like he pulls back way too much, and I feel like he oversells way too much for like any given scene.
Mm-hmm.
Like any given scene with any movies that he's in, if you go back and watch like Lady in the Water, it feels like he's overselling that 100% of the time. But then a movie like The Sixth Sense, like this scene specifically that you're talking about, it feels like he's underselling it. So it's like, which one of these is it? Like, are you going to be this big bombastic guy? I think it's such a strange feeling.
Yeah. But yeah, it definitely is like a strange feeling, but I think that's a feeling that he wants like the audience to have because it kind of keeps the audience at ease or not at ease, the opposite of ease, where it just kind of keeps them on edge just
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know. It's a very tense situation. We're feeling certain things, and he wants us to feel like another way. But I don't know. Kind of moving on a little bit from that disturbing scene. Well, what else do you want to talk about, like with the Sixth Sense? Like, what's something that really, like, especially on this rewatch, that kind of like surprised you?
As far as the actual rewatch goes, I feel like I'm not very surprised by this movie anymore. Like, I know quite a
Hmm.
bit about it. One thing that did surprise me doing the research that I did about this as a whole is just the amount of money that this movie made.
Oh,
Um,
jeez.
do you know? Let me ask you this: do you know how long this movie was running at the box office?
I know it was running. It could have ran longer, just because if Phantom Menace didn't come out, it probably would have had like a much large. It probably would have made more money if Phantom Menace didn't come out. And I don't. I can't remember how long it ran, but I know it
I
ran
mean, this movie
alongside
holds some
Blair Witch.
records, is the thing. So let me tell you
Hmm.
about this, right? The movie opened at number one at the box office, and it brought in
Hmm.
about 26 million for its opening weekend. It
Hmm.
stays at number one for 5 consecutive weeks, and it stays in the top 10 for 15 weeks straight. Even after that, it continued to just keep making money, like
Hmm.
more and more as time went on. And then if you go back and look at like the actual like week by week numbers of how much money this movie made,
Hmm.
um, it was like continuously like just gradually going down over time since its release because it came out in August. It was in theaters still until February. And on the February, like the weekend of Valentine's Day, that movie had a 200% increase from where it was at.
That's
So it
something
was
that would
going,
never happen today.
yeah, like it was sitting at around $300,000 the week before, and then it hit, I think, about I can't remember how much the next weekend, but and then the weekends after that, because of word of mouth and couples who went to go see it on Valentine's Day, just continue to make money. It stated in the theatrical, it had a theatrical window of about 41 weeks.
I really wish we can go back to that time, because it's
It's
really
crazy,
crushing
man.
my dreams that like a movie like The Bike Riders, like this year, was like in theaters for like less than a week, and they immediately put it on Peacock.
And they
Like
also, I mean, they were about to go just straight to digital with it too, with that movie, because I
Mhm,
think Focus Features at the last second just swooped in and bought it. But it's the same thing with Romulus. That was supposed to be just a Hulu release, and after Prey did so well, they were like, screw it, like let's just put it in theaters, see how well it does.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, movies just don't do as well as they used to anymore. It's crazy. This movie holds a record for like the most consecutive weeks at the box office or something like that. And then on top of that, it has the title of the highest rented title of all time from
Mhm.
places like Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, literally just like the highest rented title of all time.
And it it's funny that you mentioned about the box office like records, because I remember M. Night Shyamalan, like he was actually worried about like this movie, whether people actually go see it, just because the Blair Witch Project was opening wide the day that the Sixth Sense like launched. And I don't know about you. Well, you said like you were 1 years old at the time, but like
I was
when
seeing
I was,
Blair Witch that weekend.
yeah. But I remember like on the playground, like at school, I heard people talk about the Blair Witch Project constantly. Like people, like it I don't.
It
It
was a
was kind of
cultural
like the.
phenomenon for a while.
Mhm. Definitely a cultural phenomenon, just because we did like YouTube wasn't necessarily a thing back then, so no one could really like fact check anything. So it was very like this
The marketing
mystery
for that movie
movie.
really sold it. I think also
Yeah.
just it's like you're saying, YouTube wasn't a thing. If The Sixth Sense was in theaters now and it was released like let's say even 2010, I think it'd still make a pretty good amount of money 2010. But if it was released anytime after 2021, like that movie would probably make little to no money.
They would have spoiled people would have spoiled the movie because I know that you and we love like the theatrical experience. The reason why I haven't seen Romulus,
that's why I go to the theater as soon as I can to see a movie. It really has nothing to
Mhm.
do with like everybody thinks it's, oh well, you just have to be there opening night so you could say you were there. I'm like, no, dude, I see so much stuff on the internet about spoilers before it happens. Like I saw a spoiler for Romulus the week before it even came out. So
Oh, jeez.
it's insane.
It's
But yeah,
wild just because it's wild just because I the reason why I've waited so long to see Romulus is just because I don't the theatrical experience, at least for the people around me, have ruined everything. The way people like record like the screen just so they can get like a viral moment of like a line like happening, and I feel like if that happened with The Sixth Sense, like the whole movie would have been ruined just because they're
oh, they would have
so
posted it online immediately.
yeah, and it's just wild, like the times that we're living in, like right now,
Yeah.
to be honest. But yeah, I when kind of like going back to like the whole Blair Witch Project and like Sixth Sense, like releasing on the same day. Would you kind of consider like this first? I know I know like on film Twitter, people want to find like the next Barbenheimer, but was this like kind of like the first kind of like Barbenheimer, technically?
Dude, it's so weird that I think everyone is kind of talking about it like it's such a specific moment in time, but
Mhm,
it's I think it's only because people aren't going to the movies as much. And something like
mhm,
Barbenheimer is considered as like, oh well, this is the weekend that everybody went to the movies that year.
mhm,
But if you go back and look at like what movies were being released on what days, like I'm telling you, the video that I'm like this video I'm working on for the Shyamalan project I'm doing,
mhm,
I've gone back and looked at what days his movies released, but then I'm also like, you know what? I'm curious as to what was also releasing in theaters that weekend. It is insane the amount of movies that I'm
mhm,
like, dude, I would have 100% done a double feature for that. I would have done a double feature for that. Like
mhm.
movies used to be released in theaters on like a regular basis to the point where it was like you could go see 2 or 3 new movies every week and they were all really freaking good.
Mhm. And like I said at the beginning of the podcast, 1999 really was the greatest. The great. Well, I know everyone. That's always kind of like a tagline for pretty much every video. Like this year was the greatest year for movies, but 1999 really was just because, like I said, Star Wars, The Matrix came out that year, which is wild. I don't know. It, it I totally agree with you. Like if I was able to go to the movies like during that time, I definitely would do a double feature for like all those movies in 1999. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So,
It's interesting to go back and look at what movies were released on the same day. If you
mhm,
go back to like the 70s and 80s, it was like you had one major release every weekend because it was very rare that movies were being made that frequently. Anything that did have like 2 or 3 releases, there was always something big. But like it's like 90s to like the mid 2000s, maybe even like 2010s. There was always like at least 2 releases every weekend. Sometimes depending, like 2 major releases anyway. um
mhm.
Indie movies have kind of started to become more and more common in the mid 2000s, and that's something that I see a lot more of. But it's also like it's kind of died down since then, unfortunately.
Yeah. Hopefully we can like get back to like that 1999 era, and I feel like th- like that's what M Night is kind of. That's what I appreciate most about him is that you like yeah. Most of his movies you can find like on streaming, but like Trap is still in theaters, and I feel like like when he's finding like distributors to distribute his movie, I feel like that's probably like in like his contract to like, hey, you got to play like this movie in theaters because like my movies deserve to be played like on the big screen, and I feel like his movies really do. Just because I would love to see like The Sixth Sense, like
He's
like
also
on the big screen.
self-funding most of his movies, which I don't think is
Mhm,
really that common for filmmakers. But when you have somebody like Nolan who is working with producers as well as distributors. They're kind of doing a 2-in-1 deal where it's like he has to have in his contract, like, oh, this is going to play in theaters for this amount of time.
Hmm.
Whereas Shyamalan is pretty much paying for these things himself, and it's just like taking a distributor and saying like, either you release it in theaters or I don't sell it to you. And they just kind of have
Hmm.
to agree with it because it's like it's not your product, it's not your movie, it's his movie. He could take it somewhere else if he wanted to. But I mean, I think this is Universal he worked with again, didn't he, for Trap?
Trap was Warner Brothers, I believe. I don't think like he signed a deal with Warner Brothers to
I could be wrong
distribute.
then. I know that he did Split and Glass, and then like The Visit he sold all to Universal. That's kind of how he got good deals with them, but I could be wrong on Trap. But at the end of the day, he's self-funding his movies. That's so cool to me. Pretty much still
Yeah,
living off of the paycheck he got for The Sixth Sense, which is crazy.
it's which is wild because like see, the paycheck he got from The Sixth Sense was 640 million worldwide box office for The Sixth Sense on a $40 million budget, which is absolutely like wild to me. Like that, like just people are always shocked that he self funds like his movies now, but like
He
it's
makes them for
exactly
nothing. Like they're so
yeah.
cheap to make. He makes them for like I think he did The Visit for like $10 million, and then he sold it for like I don't know how much. It's like you're already making your money back there, but also the amount of money it's gonna make in theaters. Like, dude, it's easy money for him right there.
Disney needs to take a page from M Night's book because like the it's wild that what Disney's budgets are. They're so inflated at this
Well,
point,
you got to
man.
remember that the reason that their budgets are so big is because they bring back people like Robert Downey Jr. to play a character that literally get to play anybody else. But that's just me.
Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast, but let's kind of wrap up like The Sixth Sense a little bit and talk a little bit about the ending scenes a little bit. Probably one of my favorite shots in the entire movie is like what is the scene where Cole tells like his mother that about his secret, about his gift, and it's such a brilliant shot. It's a you know that I love oneers like in movies, and like it's set up so like beautifully with like this car crash like that happened like in the background, and the camera like basically dolly zooms. Is that correct? Dolly zooms. I can I'm into filmmaking, but sometimes I get it I get it
I
wrong.
can't remember if I'm being honest. I saw it a few weeks ago. I've already watched so many movies since then. I do think I want to say like it's been I want to say it was a dolly zoom of some sort, but I really am not sure. I want to say that the camera's on a dolly.
Hmm.
But I really can't remember if it's a zooming shot or not.
But basically, like the camera like tracks like all these cars and goes all the way to Cole and his mother's car, and Cole basically says like, "Hey, I've got a secret. I got to tell you." Like the person in the person that was in that car crash, she's dead, and she's standing right near my window. And I love the way it just flashes to the woman that was, I believe, was in a bike accident. It looks like because she had like a bike helmet on or something
Mhm.
like that, and such a beautiful, heartbreaking scene of him getting the courage to kind of like tell his mother everything that's been going on, and then he tells her. I feel like the movie could have been, it was heartbreaking at that moment, and then he mentions like grandma, like his mom's mom,
Mhm.
and she. I don't understand how Tony Collette didn't get like an Oscar for like this performance. The like we could have a whole conversation about Haley Joel Osment being snubbed.
I
Like
think she got a nomination for it though. Like I know that she didn't win, but she definitely got a
mhm.
nomination.
Yeah, well, that's what the Academy does to Tony Collette. They just nominate her and then they just give it to someone else that supposedly is quote unquote deserving because they've been in the industry longer. Whole nother podcast talking about like the Academy in other ways. But what do you think of like this scene that is set up about Cole telling a secret to his mom?
I think the whole scene is awesome.
Hmm.
It's just as a whole, I think it's like you're saying, like there's a lot of beauty to that scene, but it's also a very revealing scene.
Hmm.
Um, I love this kind of weird turn, not weird turn, but I guess, but just like this very sudden turn that we've had in horror recently, where we're getting more and more horror movies where it feels more like there's a lot of beauty behind the horror and a lot more like sincerity behind it.
Mhm.
Stuff that's not just like terrifying or, you know, scary for the being of sake of being scary or even trying to scare you, but just like genuinely good stories about people and about the afterlife that could or could not exist. You know, you have stories like The Exorcist about a man who is losing his faith and has to find it again to save a little girl.
Mhm.
Someone who just lost his mother, who is very close to. Same thing with like The Haunting of Hill House, which I think is amazing.
Mhm.
Mike Flanagan. Actually, Mike Flanagan as a whole, like all of his stories are just so beautifully done. But even example like The Night House starring Rebecca Hall that I watched in the last year or so, last 2 years, I want to say. But
Mhm.
that's another movie I'd say like just does horror really well, but also understands that like there's a lot of beauty behind what they're doing and these stories that they're telling. I think Shyamalan as a whole is a very sincere filmmaker.
Mhm.
He's very earnest and he's very much like the kind of person who doesn't really care how he's perceived when it comes to making a movie or if it is even quote unquote scary. Like I think
Mhm.
that's what kills too much of all these movies being made now is that everybody wants to be the scariest movie ever made. Everybody wants to have this like, oh well, like this movie was so terrifying audiences couldn't sit through it. It's like I don't want that movie. I want a movie
Mhm.
that is just a story that is being told and it can blow me away. And if there's some scary moments, that's fine. But at the end of the day, I'm there for a good, more sincere moment from somebody who actually wrote it.
Well, you're here. You're here for like communications between characters because when it all boils down to it, that's really what movies are all about two people kind of like having a conversation and building like that relationship throughout
I'd
its
say
full runtime.
communication is like the biggest theme that you kind of see in the Sixth Sense in general. Is
Hmm.
just, I mean, you have the wife and the husband who are struggling, and then you find out he's dead. So there's kind of like that sense of like, oh, that's not really communication. It's kind of a, but it's still kind of the same story. And then you have the same thing with Unbreakable. Bruce Willis is also struggling with his wife, and there's just a lot of factors I think come into it. A lot of his movies just to kind of have the same theme, but in general, films as a whole are generally about communication.
Yeah. And the thing that was heartbreaking for me about like that scene as well is kind of like something that always kind of like haunts like us about like when we lose like a loved one. We always like there's always like a moment like where you kind of wish it didn't end like on that. And what's revealed like with Cole's mother is uh that she had like a fight with her mom and she never got to see her dance. and
Hmm.
and Cole basically says, uh, "Grandma saw you dance, and you were beautiful, and she
Hmm.
was always proud of you." And I feel like that's like that moment right there. It's like he like because when he first tells like her uh, his secret, she sort of didn't really believe him, and then that's
Yeah.
when he basically says like, "Well, I talk to grandma like all the time," and
I
it's
had her on
kind
the
of
phone
like
last
that.
week. Like,
Yeah, it was. It's like a gateway into
hmm,
um like obviously like Cole's is definitely like a gateway into like the spirit world, but it's I don't know. It's I just thought that was beautiful where um Cole's mother actually had like a had closure there for sure. But
I think it's also just one of those things that you see in movies all the time where someone reveals a secret and it's like there's only one way that this person could have known that. So it's like once they reveal that, it's like, okay, now we're
mhm,
taking you seriously.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. And you feel like the movie could have ended like right there where Cole
Oh, it easily
like
could have. Like if that
yeah,
movie ended right there, I think it still would have been just as much talked about, if not more.
yeah. And then you find out like the big twist because everyone likes to talk about like the like twist being Cole saying "I see dead people" to Bruce, and that's like supposedly is the twist, but the actual twist is what happens that we've been talking about throughout this entire podcast. Bruce Willis is dead the entire time, and the like kind of like going back like to what I was saying, like Shyamalan planting like the seeds and him kind of like revealing like how he planted those seeds. I thought it was like a tremendous reveal. But what'd you think about this? I think we already talked about it a little bit.
It's
But
a great reveal. I think it's one of those things that even as an adult and knowing it for almost your entire life, like even knowing that reveal, the movie still holds up really well. And even
Mhm,
whenever it does tell you how it's done, it's like a magic trick almost. It kind of feels
mhm.
like it's like, oh my gosh, like it was there the entire time and I didn't even notice.
Yeah, it's Shyamalan being like a magician, like
Hmm.
it kind of like playing with the editing and tricking the audience. And I honestly think like Shyamalan is like he's loved throughout like film Twitter and just like the film community just because they love like his, well, I wouldn't say love like his writing style or his filmmaking style, but they can kind of see themselves a little bit. At least I can, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of like art to to his to his craft, but it's very approachable craft. Like it's not a lot of flashy like special effects or anything like that. Like
It
you
feels like
said,
one
like
of us. Yeah.
mhm, he definitely feels like one of us. And I don't know. I don't know. I just I kind of that's kind of the one thing that kind of like draws me to like M Night and like his films
Yeah.
because
He did try to do the big blockbuster kind of filmmaker lifestyle for a minute. He did Last Airbender and After Earth, which fair enough. I think, I've gone back and watched both of them over the last month or so. I don't think they're that bad. I think they're actually pretty okay movies. Last Airbender, especially, I feel like it gets a lot of shit, but it's not as bad as people say it is. Lady in the Water, I think that might be his worst movie.
well, we'll get to those movies when the time comes, but uh yeah, Last Airbender though, he definitely tried with the big special effects, and I do agree with
I
you.
don't
It's a
I don't
little
think the VFX or even the cinematography, I think when it comes to the actual filming element of the film, it does not look bad. Does it look well adapted? No. Is the film well adapted? No. Like it is a terrible adaptation, but when it comes to the actual like just fundamentals of filmmaking, I think it looks better than like half of the movies that release now.
yeah, and I feel like part of like why his films like look better than that is because one, he shoots on film. He's probably one of the few filmmakers that actually shoot on film still. I think Trap was shot on film. Was it shot on
35
film?
mil, yeah. The Visit
Yeah.
was shot on digital. I think that's more for the I think like the aspect of what you're watching it on, kind of how it's supposed to look. And then I want to say that he shot something else on digital pretty recently, but I can't remember what. Like I want
Is
to
it
say he shot
well?
two movies digitally. Actually, I think it was Last Airbender or After Earth. They might have been both of those.
That actually makes sense because those movies just look completely flat. But that's why The Sixth Sense is able to hold up, at least visually in my eyes, just because it looks like a movie that could have been shot today, and
Mhm.
it's very timeless. But yeah, kind of going back to like the Bruce Willis reveal. Like I think it's a really well done reveal, and didn't really talk about Bruce Willis's performance throughout this entire movie all that much, but I know Bruce Willis is kind of like he's dealing with like that aphasia disease, but um I feel like if he wasn't doing it going through that right now, I feel like The Sixth Sense, much like and Unbreakable, would be movies that he could be making today as well, because like when
I would hope he would. I think before he started going through this whole situation, he was doing a lot of like very small, low budget movies or movies that kind of like seem like they're the kind of movies you see like just old action stars doing now, where they'll just be
Mhm.
like very easy movies for them to make because they can pump out as much of them as they can and they just go on to the next one. And it's kind of just how they're making their paydays kind of go by now.
Mhm. Yeah. I don't know. I just like how just just small character moments
Hmm.
within this movie, like the first therapy session where or when he's meets Cole for like the first time, like with his mother, and he says he's gonna read his mind, and he has like he does like the um kind of like the thing with his fingers, like he puts his hand on his head. It's
Yeah,
such like a small little moment that I think adds to his character for sure. But
it definitely does.
yeah, but yeah, is there anything else you wanted to talk about, like with the Sixth Sense, or?
Not necessarily. I feel like I've gotten to the point now where like my knowledge of like Shyamalan has just gotten so like I'll just walk around and tell people like, do you know he shot this on film? Like it's just so
Mhm.
much of like his career.
Yeah, I I kind of I feel like I've reached that as well, but I don't know. It's Shyamalan will always continue to surprise me, and I don't think he really needs a twist for me personally to kind of like add that element to surprise me. But um, I hope everyone who listened to this podcast, you watched the movie before before listening to this podcast.
I feel like even if you didn't watch the movie before, you probably already know that Bruce Willis is dead.
Well, I don't know. Like I know everyone like the whole I see dead people is kind of like everywhere. Like you mentioned,
Maybe
like
like younger people don't know about it, but like anybody in my age group that's like mid 20s, I would
mhm.
say probably knows because I knew that line before I saw the movie years before. Like it was just one of those that's just been memed to death. Uh Maybe kids nowadays, like maybe younger than 20, probably don't know that line. You know
Mhm.
what I mean?
Well,
Like it was a reference that we probably got going up.
it's the I see dead people line isn't necessarily like it doesn't tell you that Bruce Willis is dead though.
Well, no,
Like
that's what I
it's
mean though. But like you see
uh,
that line because of the plot twist, but also I think 50 First Dates is a big one as well that probably a lot of people my age saw. Um, it's also just one of those things that I feel like you hear in movie like other references to movies.
well, it's in the Kendrick Lamar music video, the beef,
It is
Kendrick
there's
Lamar and Drake.
actually I can't remember which one it is. I think it's Ocean's 12, but there's a scene where I can't remember who's in the second movie. It's like someone that's in the first like in I want to say it's in Sixth Sense or in Breakable or Signs, but they make a reference to it and they say like, "Oh,
Mhm.
Bruce Willis was dead the whole time." Like it's just stuff like that.
Yeah, it definitely like the cultural significance of this movie definitely like spread wide, which
Hmm.
like for this film. I just think it's funny because supposedly I was watching an interview with M Night Shyamalan after watching this movie. Uh, is apparently M Night hates that line. I see dead people because it's very. He thought it's kind of like childish. Like he doesn't
Hmm.
see Haley Joel Osment's like character saying something like that because it's kind of it's younger.
He thought it would be believable, is what he said. He was like, "I don't think this kid would say that."
Yeah. So I think that's kind of funny because everyone
And it's
mentions
become
it.
one of the
Because
most
like
iconic lines ever.
yeah. Uh, but yeah. Um, Martin. So that was the Sixth Sense. That culturally significant film for M Night Shyamalan. Like his technically like his first major hit, and definitely like it's like it definitely like shocked the world and surprised the world in so many ways. I'm glad it was like this financial success and great for movie theaters, like playing from August all the way to February,
It
like in
went farther than
1999.
February. It went farther than February. That's just
Yeah.
where it kept going, is what I mean.
Yeah, kind of like I guess like a movie that came out today would be like Avatar. It would be kind of like Avatar.
Avatar actually, funny enough, got pretty close to beating that, but still
Hmm.
just quite not there. I think it got pretty close to beating it in terms of I know it beat it for money wise, but actual like time wise and theatrical run, I think it got pretty close. Either it's got pretty close or it's like right about the same level.
Yeah, and then I think the no, I don't know if there's like any like um record for this, but I remember Frozen stayed in theaters a while because I was working at a movie theater at that time, and it just kept playing. So, which I don't know how I feel about that because Frozen's not that great of a film, but but yeah.
Frozen was in theaters for a long time, but it was also a kids movie, and some people like tend to forget. I think whenever people talk about like movies
Mhm.
being in theaters for a long time, making a lot of money, they're like, "How?" It's like, "Oh, it's made a lot of money."
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's like kids movies. People underestimate how much kids movies make. It's actually insane.
Yeah, like I kind of underestimated Inside Out 2 making the gangbusters that it made this summer. But
I think it was easy to like kind of doubt Inside Out 2, but it's only because of, I think personally, the way that films are kind of doing right now in general. I just didn't see it making that much money.
Yeah, but it is a sequel, and
Okay,
unfortunately,
so
Disney
do
is
you want to
getting the
know
wrong
how
message.
much? Do you want to know how much Avatar ran for?
What? Okay, what's
For its
so
initial theatrical run from
for Avatar 1?
Avatar 1, December 18th of 2009, and it ran until, hold on a second. There's something wrong with these numbers. Hold on. Oh
Are you on
no,
Box Office Mojo right now?
I'm actually on a website called The Numbers, which is the
Okay.
one I use specifically. But it ran from December 18th, 2009 to November 12th, 2010. 48 weeks.
That's crazy.
Stupid money, bro. And then
Yeah.
it re-released in theaters on September 23rd, 2022, September 30th, 2022, and October 7th, a 3-week run, which they still consider it technically part of like its theatrical run, and it says 667 weeks.
Hey. And James Cameron had like say in all that. So
Oh yeah, I wouldn't say that those 3 count, like those specific days, but 48 weeks is better. But at the time, I mean, this is also a different type of movie.
yeah, for sure. It's like one of those. I feel like now like those like Avatar is one of those movies where people like we have to see it in theaters, even though there's many people online that don't care for Avatar all that much. But they'll
They
definitely
don't get it. They
they're
won't
not
get
gonna
it.
watch it on Disney Plus. So, but yeah. But Martin, thank you for joining me. I know we're kind of all over the place a little bit. I might have to edit out like some of our tangents a little bit, but thank you for joining me for this Sixth Sense discussion. M. Night Shyamalan's first major hit. But with that being said, where can people find you online?
I do have my handle pretty similarly online, but I would say the easiest one to find me on is like Twitter. If you type in Van Watches Movies or my actual username, my handle is Alejandro XPADI. It's pretty easy to find me on there, and then I have a link tree that has all of my socials on there as well.
Yeah, and all those links will be posted in the description box down below. And if people aren't annoyed by me by the end of this podcast, you could follow me pretty much everywhere on social media with the username at Marley Loves Film. Most active places are Instagram and Threads right now. Threads is popping off. Like I'm not on Twitter anymore, but Threads, there's a lot of Twitter people migrating over to Threads.
I heard of the migration wave, but I also know about apparently like if you make a Threads account, if you delete that account, it deletes your Instagram. So I was like, I'm not doing this right now. Maybe
Yeah,
once it gets bigger, I don't know. I think right now, as crappy and as awful as Twitter is, like I've had quite a bit of fortune there.
yeah, I've seen that tweet that went major viral, like the
Getting
like the
dragged
past
left and
couple
right.
weeks. So
So I want to not preface this, but I want to clear something up. Nobody understood at all what I was trying to say with that tweet, but yet we have 7,000 replies of people saying, "Guy's never read a comic book in his life." This guy's actually, I have a comic book right here that I was reading before I recorded with you. So yeah,
yeah,
people
well,
really have no idea who I am. Like it's so funny.
that don't you love going viral because the like the post or video will reach the depths of the internet that you had no idea it was gonna go. But
It was insane. I had people in my DMs. I had people finding me on Instagram, messaging me and just saying like, "You should shut up on Twitter." And I was just like, "That's kind of fun."
I love it so much. But yeah, people can follow me pretty much everywhere on social media with username at Marley Loves Film. Be sure to subscribe or rate and review like this podcast on your podcast platform of choice. But with that being said, let's get back to the movies.